There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They don't announce themselves with thunder or fanfare. They slip in through the side door, wearing the quiet cloak of a Tuesday night, a shared pizza, a movie neither of you is watching. They are the moments that, in retrospect, become the load-bearing walls of your memory, the silent hinges upon which your entire world pivots. For me, that moment wasn't one singular event, but a season of them, a slow accumulation of nights that all felt the same and yet were fundamentally different from everything that had come before. It began, as so many things did, with Alex on my couch. But this time, he was asleep, his head resting not on a cushion, but in the hollow of my shoulder, his breathing a soft, rhythmic current against my neck. And I was wide awake, cataloging the weight of him, the impossible reality of his proximity, and trying to remember how to breathe myself. He was a warm, solid presence, a line of heat pressed against my side from shoulder to knee. The faint, clean scent of his shampoo, a mix of something like sandalwood and mint, had woven itself into the fabric of my t-shirt. In the blue-gray light of the television's idle screen, I could trace the sweep of his eyelashes against his cheek, the slight parting of his lips. He was completely unguarded in sleep, a state I had rarely witnessed. Alex in the waking world was a creature of kinetic energy, of broad smiles and easy laughter, a man who filled every room he entered. But here, in the stillness of my living room, he was something else entirely, quiet, vulnerable, and achingly close. My own heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a wild, terrified bird beating its wings against a cage. I was convinced he must be able to feel it, that its frantic rhythm would seep through my chest and into his, waking him up to the terrible, beautiful secret I was keeping. The secret was this. I had been in love with him for 4 years, and this was the closest I had ever been to him. It was a perfect, exquisite torture. The remote was on the floor, just beyond the tips of my fingers. The credits of some forgotten action movie had long since rolled, leaving the screen to cycle through a screensaver of picturesque landscapes, mountains and oceans I had only ever dreamed of seeing. It felt like a mockery, this display of vast, open spaces, when my own world had shrunk to the scant inches between my body and his. Every nerve ending along my left side was on high alert, a field of tiny sensors reporting back with an overwhelming flood of data. The texture of his worn cotton hoodie, the surprisingly soft brush of his hair where it touched my jaw, the gentle rise and fall of his chest that mirrored my own, only slower, calmer. A universe of sensation was unfolding in the space he occupied, and my only role was to remain perfectly still, to become a statue carved from equal parts longing and terror. To move would be to shatter the spell. To breathe too deeply would be to confess everything. So I held my breath, counted the seconds, and pretended I was just a piece of furniture, a convenient resting place, and not a man whose entire existence was being rewritten by the simple, unconscious trust of his best friend falling asleep on him. This scene, I knew even then, was not the beginning of the story. It was the heart of it, the moment everything else would orbit around. To understand the precariousness of that night, the sheer, cliff-edge vertigo I felt, you have to understand the foundation we had built. You have to go back. I met Alex Miller in a class I had no business being in. It was a sophomore-level requirement for his engineering degree, materials science and engineering for me, a photography major. It was a misclicked elective I was too stubborn to drop. I spent the first 3 weeks utterly lost, adrift in a sea of polymers, ceramics, and stress-strain curves. I sat in the back, hoping to become invisible, my sketchbook a far more compelling landscape than the professor's slides. Alex, of course, sat in the front row. He was impossible to miss. Even in a lecture hall of 300, he had a kind of personal gravity. He was a swimmer then, and he carried the sport in his frame, in the powerful breadth of his shoulders and the easy, fluid way he moved. He'd lean forward, chin propped on his hand, asking questions that were both insightful and somehow disarmingly charming. He'd laugh with the professor, a bright, genuine sound that made a few heads turn every time. My head, certainly. I started sketching him in the margins of my notebook, trying to capture the line of his jaw or the way his hair fell across his forehead when he was concentrating. He was a study in light and angles, a subject I was drawn to with an instinct I couldn't explain. Our worlds were not supposed to intersect. He was all bright surfaces and forward momentum. I was comfortable in the shadows, in the quiet alchemy of the darkroom where I could watch images slowly emerge from nothing. He was part of a loud, sprawling group of athletes and fellow engineers who would spill out of the lecture hall together, their laughter echoing down the corridor. I would slip out alone, my headphones a shield against the world. Yet, one afternoon, the shield failed. I was packing my bag, lost in thought, and didn't see him turn back from the doorway. We collided. My portfolio, a large, unwieldy case filled with my best prints, went flying. Sheets of glossy and matte paper scattered across the grimy linoleum floor like a deck of oversized cards. Mortification was a hot flush that crawled up my neck. I dropped to my knees, scrambling to gather the images before they could be trampled, before too many eyes could see them. These were not just assignments. They were pieces of me, quiet moments I had captured and coaxed into existence. They felt deeply personal, and their sudden public display felt like a violation. "Oh, man, I am so sorry." His voice was right beside me. I looked up, and there he was, crouching down, his long legs folded awkwardly. He wasn't laughing. His face, which I had only ever seen from a distance, was etched with genuine concern. He started carefully gathering the prints, handling them with a surprising reverence, as if he understood they were more than just paper. "It's fine," I mumbled, my voice barely a whisper. "I just wanted the ground to swallow me whole." "No, it's not. My fault completely," he said, stacking a few prints neatly. He paused, his eyes lingering on one. It was a shot I was particularly proud of, a black and white photo of an old, abandoned greenhouse, with vines crawling over broken panes of glass, a single beam of light cutting through the decay. "Wow, did you take this?" I nodded, my throat tight. "This is incredible," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. He wasn't just being polite. He looked from the photograph to me, his blue eyes, a shade I'd later learn was the exact color of the ocean on a clear day, holding a new kind of curiosity. "You're really good." That was it. That was the first thread. A clumsy collision, a scattered portfolio, and a single, unexpected compliment. He helped me gather every last print, walked with me out of the building, and asked my name. When I said, "Leo," he smiled, a full, brilliant smile that seemed to light up the overcast afternoon. "Alex," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm and warm. For the rest of the semester, he would save me a seat next to him, leaning over to whisper jokes about the professor or to ask me what I was working on in my photo classes. He made the cavernous lecture hall feel smaller, less anonymous. He made a space for me. And just like that, my quiet, solitary orbit was captured by his gravitational pull. Our friendship grew in the interstitial spaces of college life. In the library, where he'd struggle through coding assignments while I edited photos, the quiet tap of his keyboard a counterpoint to the soft click of my mouse. We'd study for hours, fueled by cheap coffee and a shared, unspoken understanding that we were better together than apart. His world of logic and defined systems was a strange and fascinating continent to me, and he, in turn, seemed endlessly intrigued by my world of intuition and aesthetics. He would come to the student gallery shows, studying my photographs with a quiet intensity that made me feel more seen than I had ever felt in my life. He'd point to a print and say, "I like this one. It feels lonely, but in a good way. Like it's okay to be by yourself." He had a way of cutting straight to the emotional core of an image, a skill that seemed at odds with his pragmatic field of study, but was perfectly in line with the person he was. He was kind. It was the most fundamental thing about him. A deep, unassuming kindness that manifested in small, consistent ways. He'd remember I hated onions and pick them off his half of the pizza without a word. He'd text me a link to a photography competition he'd seen, with the message, "You should enter this. You'd win," When I got a nasty flu that kept me bedridden for 3 days, he showed up at my dorm room with a bag containing soup, ginger ale, and an entire season of a sci-fi show he swore would cure me. He didn't just perform friendship, he inhabited it. And somewhere in the midst of all that kindness, my admiration curdled into something deeper, something more dangerous. It happened so gradually, I didn't notice the exact moment of transition. It was like watching a photograph develop in the chemical bath. One moment the paper is blank, the next a faint outline appears, and then, slowly, inexorably, the image resolves into something clear and undeniable. One evening, we were sitting on a bench overlooking the campus green. It was late spring, and the air was thick with the scent of cut grass and blooming flowers. He was talking about his girlfriend at the time, Sarah, a girl from his hometown. He spoke of her with an easy, comfortable affection, and as I listened, a cold, sharp ache bloomed in my chest. It wasn't just envy. It was a profound, hollow longing. I wanted to be the one he spoke about with such warmth. I wanted to be the one he went home to. It was the first time I allowed myself to name the feeling, and its name was love. The realization was terrifying. Alex was my best friend. He was, as far as I had any reason to believe, completely straight. The architecture of our friendship was built on a foundation of easy platonic intimacy, and my newfound feelings were a seismic event threatening to bring the whole structure down. So I did the only thing I could think of to do. I hid it. I built a new room inside myself, a secret, soundproof chamber where I could store my feelings for him. I became a meticulous curator of my own affection, displaying only the parts that were safe, appropriate, friendly. The rest, the yearning, the hope, the quiet desperation, I locked away. It was an act of self-preservation. I could not bear the thought of losing him, and the risk of confession felt like a risk of total annihilation. Our friendship was a rare and precious thing, a sanctuary. I would rather live in the sanctuary with a locked room in my heart than be cast out into the wilderness alone. So for years, that was our dynamic. Leo, the steady, quiet friend. Alex, the bright, magnetic center. I was the keeper of his stories, the one he called when he needed to vent about his coding projects or his on-again, off-again relationship with Sarah. I became an expert in cheering him on from the sidelines of his life. I photographed his swim meets, my lens finding him in the chaos of churning water, a lone figure of grace and power. I helped him move into his first apartment after graduation, hauling boxes up 3 flights of stairs in the sweltering July heat. I was at his graduation party, a proud, silent observer in the corner, watching him celebrate with his family. I was a constant, a fixed point. And he, in turn, was mine. He was the one who bullied me into setting up a professional website for my photography, who celebrated my first paid gig as if it were his own lottery win. When my father was ill, Alex was the one who would just sit with me for hours in my apartment, not offering empty platitudes, just offering his presence, a silent testament that I wasn't alone. He never gave me any reason to believe he saw me as anything other than a friend. His affection was open and generous, but it was uniformly distributed. The arm he slung around my shoulders felt no different from the way he'd greet any of his other friends. There were no lingering glances, no loaded pauses, no accidental brushes of his hand against mine that felt like they might mean more. I was a connoisseur of these micro-expressions, a professional observer of unspoken things, and the landscape of his affection for me was consistently, heartbreakingly platonic. And I had made my peace with that. Or so I had told myself. I had built my life around the shape of our friendship, designing it to be sustainable. I dated other people, half-heartedly. I poured my energy into my work. I convinced myself that what we had was enough. It was more than enough. It had to be. Then Sarah broke up with him. For good, this time. It was not like the other times, the temporary fractures that had always mended. This was a fault line. She was moving to another state for a job, and she was starting a new life, one that didn't include him. He called me on a Thursday night. His voice was hollow, stripped of all its usual warmth and resonance. She's gone. That was all he said. 2 words, but they carried the weight of a 5-year relationship collapsing under its own history. Where are you? I asked, my own heart sinking in a complicated mix of sympathy for him and a shameful, secret relief. I don't know. Driving. Can I come over? Of course, I said, no hesitation. The doors open. He arrived 20 minutes later, looking like a ghost. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed and unfocused. He walked into my apartment and just stood in the middle of the living room, as if he'd forgotten how to move. He was holding his car keys in one hand, clenching and unclenching them. The easy confidence that was so integral to him, the very architecture of his being, had crumbled. He looked lost, like a ship that had been cut from its moorings, adrift on a vast and empty sea. I didn't know what to do. All my carefully constructed walls, all my curated, safe friendship protocols, were useless in the face of this raw, unfiltered grief. I did the only thing I could. I walked over to him, gently took the keys from his hand, and put my arms around him. He was stiff for a second, a statue of misery, and then he just collapsed against me. His body shuddered with a silent sob, his face buried in my shoulder. I held him, my own carefully guarded heart cracking open with the force of his pain. He was so much taller than me, and I felt like I was holding up a falling tower. We stood there for a long time, in the quiet of my apartment, the only sound the distant hum of the city and the ragged sound of his breathing. In that moment, I wasn't his friend with a secret. I was just his anchor. I was the only solid ground he could find. That was the shift, the catalyst. The moment the unspoken rules that had governed our friendship for years began to dissolve. After he'd cried himself out, he pulled away, wiping his face with the back of his hand, looking embarrassed. Sorry, he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. Don't be, I said softly. What do you need? He just shook his head, a gesture of complete and utter exhaustion. I don't want to be alone tonight, Leo. My apartment was a small one-bedroom. The couch in the living room was comfortable, but it was undeniably a one-person couch. My bedroom, and my bed, was through a doorway just off the living room. It was a boundary I had always been careful to maintain. It was my space, the inner sanctum. You can take the couch, I offered, the words feeling safe, normal. He nodded, sinking onto it, as if his legs could no longer support him. I got him a glass of water, a pillow from my bed, and the thickest blanket I owned. He curled up on the cushions, looking impossibly large and incredibly small at the same time. I turned off the main lights, leaving only a small lamp on in the corner. Leo, he said, his voice small from the couch. Yeah. Thanks. Anytime, I said, and I meant it more than he could possibly know. I went into my bedroom and closed the door, another act that was part of the established ritual of my life. But that night, the solid wood felt like a flimsy screen. I could feel his presence through it, a low hum of sadness that permeated the entire apartment. I lay in my bed, wide awake, listening for any sound from the other room. I heard him shift, sigh, the soft rustle of the blanket. Sleep felt like a distant country I had no visa for. My own bed, usually a place of comfort, felt vast and empty. I was acutely aware of him, just 20 feet away, navigating the wreckage of his life on my couch. It was the first of many nights I would spend awake, listening to him breathe. He didn't go home the next day. He called in sick to work, a thing I had never known him to do. He spent the day in a haze, shuffling around my apartment in his clothes from the day before, staring out the window, barely speaking. I made him coffee, which he didn't drink. I made him toast, which he didn't eat. I put on a movie, and we sat on opposite ends of the couch, the 3-foot cushion of space between us a silent, humming chasm. The air was thick with everything he wasn't saying. I didn't push. I just stayed. I worked on my laptop, editing photos, the familiar task a comfort in the strange new landscape of our cohabitation. Every now and then, I would glance over at him. He would be staring at the screen, but his eyes were vacant. He was 1,000 miles away, sifting through the rubble. That night, he looked at the couch, then at me, a question in his eyes. It's fine, I said before he could even ask. Stay. And so the ritual began. It wasn't a decision, not really. It was an erosion. The boundary between his life and mine began to wear away, grain by grain. What started as one night became a week. He went home to his empty apartment to get clothes, but he always came back. My couch became his bed. My home became his refuge. He started to talk, at first in broken fragments, then in long, rambling monologues that would last late into the night. He told me about the fights with Sarah, the slow, painful unraveling of their shared future. He talked about his loneliness, his fear of starting over. I just listened. I was his confessor, his witness. In the dim light of my living room, with the city lights painting patterns on the ceiling, he laid his broken heart bare. And I held it, carefully. The physical space between us on the couch began to shrink. It started with a foot brushing against mine. Then, one night, while we were watching another movie, he stretched out, laying his head in my lap. He did it so casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. My entire body went rigid. I froze, my hand hovering in the air, unsure of where to put it. He didn't seem to notice. He just closed his eyes, his breathing evening out. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, I slowly, tentatively, rested my hand on his head. His hair was thick and soft under my fingers. I started to gently stroke it, my heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm. He sighed in his sleep and settled deeper, a soft, contented sound. It was a gesture of such profound, unconscious trust that it stole the air from my lungs. He felt safe with me. That single, devastating fact was both a gift and a curse. This became the new normal. Movie nights ended with him asleep in my lap, or curled up against my side. The plausible deniability was paper thin, but we both clung to it. He was grieving. He needed comfort. I was his best friend. This is what friends did. These were the lies we told ourselves, the narrative we constructed to make it all okay. But every night, after he'd fallen asleep, I would lie awake, consumed by the truth. The truth was the warmth of his body seeping into mine. The truth was the way my hand fit perfectly on the back of his neck. The truth was that this ambiguous, undefined intimacy was becoming the most essential thing in my life. It was a slow-acting poison, and it was the only thing keeping me alive. My apartment, once my solitary fortress, transformed into a shared space, a terrarium for our strange, evolving relationship. His toothbrush appeared in the holder next to mine. A few of his hoodies ended up in my closet. He knew where I kept the good coffee and that I hated it when the spoons were put away in the fork compartment. We developed a domestic rhythm, a quiet language of cohabitation. We'd cook dinner together, him chopping vegetables with an engineer's precision while I moved around him, seasoning and stirring. We didn't talk about it. We never named what was happening. We existed in the bubble we had created, a world of two, governed by unspoken agreements. The primary rule was this: we do not talk about the fact that he sleeps on my couch every night, often with his arms wrapped around me. One night, about a month into this new arrangement, the couch felt too small. We were both restless. The movie was boring, and the silence between us was heavier than usual. Alex shifted, trying to get comfortable, his knee bumping mine, his shoulder pressing into my arm. He let out a frustrated sigh. "This is ridiculous," he said, sitting up. My heart dropped. I thought, this is it. He's realized how weird this is. He's leaving. He ran a hand through his hair. My back is killing me. This couch was not designed for a 6'2" person to sleep on for a month. I stayed silent, waiting for the other shoe to drop. He looked at me, then gestured vaguely towards my bedroom. Is your bed big enough for two?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy and fragile. It was a door creaking open, a threshold I was being invited to cross. The plausible deniability was wearing dangerously thin. This wasn't an accidental drifting off during a movie. This was a conscious suggestion. The room I had kept locked inside me for so long began to tremble. "It's a queen," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "It's big enough." "Would it be weird?" he asked, his gaze fixed on his hands. He was picking at a loose thread on his jeans. He looked genuinely uncertain, vulnerable. This was my chance. I could have said yes. I could have reinforced the boundary, sent him back to the couch, back to the safety of our established friendship. It would have been the sensible thing to do. It would have been the self-protective thing to do. But looking at him, at the exhaustion etched around his eyes and the genuine plea in his posture, I found I couldn't do it. The part of me that wanted to keep him safe, to offer him comfort, was stronger than the part of me that was terrified. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It wouldn't be weird." It was the biggest lie I had ever told. That first night in my bed was a masterclass in tension. We lay on our backs, a foot of empty space between us, a no-man's land of mattress. We were both hyper-aware of each other. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I could hear every breath he took. We were two magnets of the same polarity, repelling each other with the force of our shared anxiety. The silence was deafening. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. What did this mean? Was he just that desperate for a comfortable bed? Or was this something more? The ambiguity was a physical presence in the room, a third person in the bed with us. After what felt like hours, he spoke, his voice a low whisper in the dark. "Leo?" "Yeah." My heart leaped into my throat. "Can't sleep." "Me neither." A long pause. Then, he rolled onto his side, facing me. I could just make out the shape of him in the darkness. "This is weird, isn't it?" he whispered. "A little," I admitted, my own voice hushed. "Can we just pretend we're on the couch?" he asked. It was a strange, nonsensical request, but I understood it perfectly. He was asking for permission to close the distance. He was asking for the comfort he had grown accustomed to, the thoughtless intimacy of the living room, but in this new, more charged space. I didn't answer with words. I just rolled onto my side to face him. In the sliver of moonlight coming through the window, I could see his eyes, wide and searching. He hesitated for a second, and then he moved closer, bridging the gap between us. He settled his head on the pillow next to mine, his arm finding its familiar place around my waist, pulling me gently against his chest. It was the same position we had found ourselves in on the couch 100 times, but here, in the quiet dark of my bedroom, it felt entirely different. It felt intentional. His chin rested on the top of my head, and I could feel the slow, steady beat of his heart against my back. It was calm, much calmer than my own. He let out a long, slow breath, a sound of profound relief, and in minutes, he was asleep. I, of course, was not. I lay there, wrapped in his arms, in my own bed, in a state of suspended disbelief. The line had been crossed. The boundary had been redrawn. The secret room in my heart was no longer soundproof. I could hear the frantic, hopeful, terrified song it was singing, and I was sure, this time, that he could hear it too. This was no longer about comfort for a grieving friend. This was something else, and I had no idea what to call it. The ritual had now officially relocated. The couch was retired. My bed became our shared space. Every night, we would go through the motions of getting ready for bed in a way that was so domestic it made my teeth ache. We'd brush our teeth at the same time, bumping elbows at the sink. He'd steal my t-shirts to sleep in, claiming they were more comfortable. We'd climb into bed, and without a word, we would find each other in the dark. He would pull me close, his body a familiar heat against mine, and fall asleep. And every night, I would lie awake for hours, my mind a whirlwind of analysis and yearning, trying to decipher the unwritten language of our nights. During the day, we were friends. We'd talk about work, about movies, about nothing. We'd laugh. It was easy, normal. But as evening approached, a quiet tension would begin to build, an awareness of the night to come. The air would become charged with unspoken things. It was a strange and exhausting dual existence. We were living in two different relationships simultaneously, the safe, platonic friendship of the daytime, and the deeply, confusingly intimate partnership of the night. And the partition between them was becoming more transparent every day. I became a student of his sleep. I learned the subtle shifts in his breathing that signaled his descent into deeper dreams. I learned that he sometimes mumbled incoherent fragments of code or names of people I didn't know. I learned that he always sought me out in the middle of the night, even if we drifted apart, his arm finding its way back around my waist, his leg hooking over mine, anchoring himself to me. In these unconscious moments, he was more honest than he ever was during the day. In sleep, He chose me. Consistently. Without hesitation. This nightly evidence was the only thing that kept me from going insane. It was the data I clung to, the proof that I wasn't imagining the tectonic shift that was happening beneath the surface of our friendship. My photography began to change. I had always been drawn to empty spaces, to the beauty of decay and solitude. But now, I found myself obsessed with capturing moments of quiet connection. I started a new project, a series of self-portraits. But they weren't of me. They were close-ups of the traces Alex left behind. The indentation his head left on my pillow, his coffee mug left on the nightstand, the way his hoodie was draped over the back of a chair. It was an attempt to photograph a ghost, to capture the presence of someone who was both there and not there. My work became saturated with a sense of intimacy and longing that was so potent, my professor pulled me aside one day after reviewing my portfolio. "Leo," she said, her expression thoughtful, "this is a powerful new direction for you. There's a vulnerability here I haven't seen before. It feels like you're letting someone in." I just nodded, unable to speak. She had no idea how right she was. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday night in October. The weather had turned, and a cold, persistent drizzle had been falling all day, turning the city into a wash of gray reflections. We were in bed, the sound of the rain a soft, constant drumming against the window pane. For some reason, neither of us was tired. We were just lying there, facing each other, the space between us charged and electric. He hadn't pulled me close yet. We were just looking at each other in the near darkness. His eyes, usually so bright and clear, were dark and serious. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before his fingers gently brushed a strand of hair off my forehead. His touch was feather-light, but it sent a jolt through my entire system. It was the first time he had touched me with such deliberate, gentle awareness when he was fully awake. It wasn't a friendly shove or a casual arm around the shoulder. It was a caress. He didn't pull his hand away. He let it rest on the side of my face, his thumb stroking softly against my cheekbone. My breath hitched. The air in the room grew thick, heavy. I could feel his gaze on my lips. The world narrowed to this single point of contact, to the space between his mouth and mine. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of questions, of possibilities, of years of unspoken feelings. My heart was a thunderous roar in my ears. This was it. The precipice. The moment where the entire artifice of our friendship, the elaborate construction of plausible deniability, was about to crumble. I was terrified. But beneath the terror, there was a current of wild, defiant hope. After all this time, after all the nights of silent yearning, maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been imagining it. He swallowed, a small, audible sound in the quiet room. His thumb stilled on my cheek. His voice was a raw whisper, barely more than a breath. "Leo?" I couldn't speak. I could only look at him, my own eyes pleading, though for what, I wasn't sure. For him to stop? For him to continue? "Would it be okay?" he started, his voice cracking slightly on the last word. He cleared his throat and tried again, his gaze unwavering. "Would it be okay if I kissed you?" The question was a gift. It was an offering of respect, of consent, of vulnerability. He wasn't assuming. He wasn't taking. He was asking. He was giving me the power, the choice. He was laying his own confusion and desire at my feet and waiting for my verdict. In that moment, all the fear, all the anxiety of the past few months evaporated. It was replaced by a profound, overwhelming sense of clarity. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. A small, almost imperceptible movement. But it was enough. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. His eyes searched mine one last time, and then they fluttered closed. His lips met mine. It wasn't a passionate, movie-style kiss. It was soft. It was hesitant. It was tentative and questioning. It was a confession. It was the taste of rain and salt and years of pent-up longing. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. My hand came up to rest on his chest, feeling the frantic, galloping beat of his heart, which was racing just as fast as my own. He wasn't calm anymore. He was just as terrified and hopeful as I was. When he pulled back, it was only by an inch. He rested his forehead against mine, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. Neither of us spoke. There were no words for what had just happened. A line had not just been crossed, it had been erased. The two separate worlds we had been living in, day friendship and night intimacy, had just collided and merged into one. There was no going back. We had stepped off the cliff together, into the beautiful, terrifying freefall. He was still holding my face, his hands trembling slightly. I was still holding my breath. And for the first time in months, the silence wasn't filled with questions. It was filled with an answer. The morning after was blindingly bright. The rain had passed, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean, the autumn sun pouring through my window with an almost aggressive cheerfulness. It felt inappropriate, like a laugh at a funeral. I woke up alone. The other side of the bed was cold, the sheet thrown back. For a disoriented second, I thought I might have dreamed it all. The rain, the question, the kiss. But the indentation on the pillow next to mine was real. The faint scent of his shampoo was real. The memory, so vivid and sharp, was painfully real. I found him in the living room, fully dressed, staring out the window with his back to me. He was holding a mug of coffee, but he wasn't drinking it. He was rigid, a sentinel standing guard against the morning. The easy, comfortable domesticity of the past few months had vanished. In its place was a thick, suffocating awkwardness. The air was a minefield. "Hey," I said softly, my voice raspy with sleep. He flinched, a small, almost imperceptible tightening of his shoulders. He didn't turn around. "Hey," his voice was flat. "Empty." I walked towards the kitchen, my bare feet cold on the hardwood floor. I needed the ritual of making coffee, the familiar motions, something to anchor me in this strange new reality. "Coffee?" I asked, my voice overly bright. "I have to go," he said, still facing the window. The words hit me like a physical blow. "Go where?" "You have the day off." "Home," he said. "I have stuff to do." He finally turned around, and my heart sank. The open, vulnerable man from last night was gone. In his place was a stranger wearing Alex's face. His expression was shuttered, his eyes avoiding mine. He looked cornered, like a wild animal caught in a trap. "Alex," I started, taking a step towards him. "About last night." "Look, Leo," he cut me off, his voice strained. He finally met my gaze, and what I saw there was not desire or affection, but pure, undiluted panic. I was a mess last night. I'm still a mess. I shouldn't have. That was a mistake. A mistake." The word echoed in the silent apartment. A mistake. The culmination of months of intimacy, of shared beds and whispered confessions in the dark. The hesitant, beautiful honesty of his kiss. A mistake. It was a brutal negation of everything. He was taking it all back, trying to shove the truth back into the box, to lock the door on the room we had opened together. A mistake. I repeated, my voice hollow. I could feel the anger starting to bubble up through the shock and the hurt. It was a cold, sharp anger. Was it a mistake all those nights on the couch? Was it a mistake to move into my bed? Was every single night for the past 2 months a mistake, Alex? No, that's not. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure distress. That was different. You were being a good friend. A good friend. My laugh was harsh, humorless. Do your other friends hold you all night? Do you kiss your other good friends? Leo, please, he whispered, his face pale. Don't do this. Don't do what? Don't ask for the truth? Don't ask you to be honest for once. I felt a recklessness taking hold of me. The careful curator was gone, replaced by a man who had nothing left to lose. I have lived in the gray area with you for months. I have been your emotional support animal, your human weighted blanket, your midnight confessor. I have done it all because I am in love with you. I have been in love with you for years. And last night, for 1 second, I thought maybe you felt something too. But I guess that was just another thing I was useful for. A warm body to get you through a rough patch. The confession tumbled out of me, clumsy and raw and angry. It wasn't how I had ever imagined telling him. There was no gentleness, no poetry, just the jagged, ugly truth. He stared at me, his face a mask of shock. He looked like I had physically struck him. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. He just shook his head, a gesture of helpless denial. "I have to go," he said again, his voice barely audible. And then he walked past me, grabbed his keys from the bowl by the door, and left. He didn't slam the door. He closed it softly behind him, the quiet click of the latch an act of final, devastating politeness. I stood in the middle of my living room, the sun streaming in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The apartment had never felt so quiet, so empty. The ghost I had been trying to photograph was gone, and all that was left were the traces of him, mocking me from every surface. His mug on the counter, his hoodie on the chair, the lingering scent of him in the air. It was all evidence of a crime scene, the scene of the murder of my own foolish heart. I had risked everything, and I had lost. The days that followed were a study in silence. A thick, impenetrable wall of it descended between us. My texts went unanswered. My calls went straight to voicemail. He had retreated completely, pulling up the drawbridge and flooding the moat. He had vanished from my life as suddenly as he had reappeared in it. The pain was a physical thing, a constant, dull ache in my chest. It was worse than the years of silent pining. The pining had been sweetened with the hope of friendship. This was just a void, a gaping, Alex-shaped hole in the fabric of my world. I spiraled. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping, for real this time. The bed was a torture device, half of it an empty expanse that radiated cold. Every corner of my apartment was haunted. I couldn't look at the couch without remembering the weight of his head in my lap. I couldn't make coffee without automatically reaching for a second mug. I had let him weave himself so completely into the tapestry of my daily life that his absence had unraveled everything. My anger slowly cooled, leaving behind a thick sediment of grief and a surprising, resilient kernel of frustration. It wasn't just my own hurt I was stewing in. I was angry for him. I was angry at his fear. He had called what happened a mistake, but I had been there. I had felt his heart hammering against my hand. I had seen the look in his eyes. It wasn't a mistake. It was a truth he was too terrified to face. He was running from something real, and in his panic, he was destroying both of us. After a week of this agonizing silence, something inside me snapped. I could not let it end like this. I could not let our years of friendship and the fragile, beautiful thing we had built over the last few months be obliterated by his fear. He didn't get to just disappear. He didn't get to kiss me like that, to ask me a question that changed everything, and then just walk away without an explanation. I deserved more than that. We deserved more than that. I put on my shoes, grabbed my keys, and walked out of my apartment. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I had to see him. I drove to his apartment, the one he had barely been to in 2 months. I stood outside his door for a full 5 minutes, my heart pounding. My hand was shaking as I raised it to knock. The door opened, and he was there. He looked terrible. He was wearing the same sweatshirt he'd had on a week ago. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his apartment behind him was a mess. It was clear he hadn't been doing much better than I had. He just stared at me, his face a mixture of dread and something else, relief. "You can't just disappear," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "You don't get to do that." He didn't say anything. He just stepped aside, a silent invitation to come in. I walked into the sterile, impersonal space. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a temporary holding cell. Boxes were still stacked in one corner, unopened. There was nothing on the walls. It was the apartment of a man who didn't plan on staying. "I'm sorry," he said, closing the door behind me. "For what?" I asked, turning to face him. "For kissing me? Or for running away?" "Both," he whispered. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at a spot on the floor. "For everything. For being a coward." The fight went out of me, replaced by a wave of weary sadness. He wasn't a villain. He was just a man who was completely lost. "Talk to me, Alex," I said, my voice softer now. "Please, just talk to me. What happened?" He finally looked at me, his eyes swimming with unshed tears. "I don't know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what's happening to me, Leo. My whole life, I had a plan. You know? The job, the house, the wife, the kids. Sarah. It was all laid out. And then it all just fell apart. And I was lost. And you were my anchor. You were the only thing that felt real." He paused, taking a shaky breath. Being at your place, it was the only time I felt safe. The only time I didn't feel like I was drowning. And being with you, it just felt right. It felt more right than anything with Sarah had felt in years. And that scared the hell out of me. He started pacing the small living room. Lying next to you at night, I would just listen to you breathe, and it was like everything settled. All the noise in my head just stopped. And I started wanting things. I wanted to be closer. I wanted to touch you. I wanted to know what it would feel like to kiss you. And when I finally did, it was like a light switch flipped on in a room I didn't even know existed inside me. He stopped in front of me, his expression desperate. And the next morning, I saw that light, and I panicked. Because it wasn't part of the plan. You weren't part of the plan. This feeling, it's not in the blueprints for my life. So I ran. I said it was a mistake because I was trying to convince myself that it was. I was trying to turn the light back off. And did it work? I asked quietly. He shook his head, a single tear finally tracing a path down his cheek. No, it's just been dark. The past week has been the loneliest I've ever been in my entire life. Because the one person I wanted to talk to about all this was you. And I had pushed you away. All the anger, all the hurt I had been carrying, dissolved in the face of his raw, painful honesty. He had not been using me. He had been falling apart and falling in love at the same time, and he hadn't had the language or the courage to understand it. I closed the distance between us and wrapped my arms around him. He sagged against me, burying his face in my neck, and this time, his sobs were not silent. They were ragged, wrenching sounds of a dam breaking. I just held him, my own tears welling up in my eyes. I held him through the fear and the confusion and the pain. I was his anchor again. But this time, it was different. We were both holding on. When his sobs finally subsided, he pulled back, his hands still resting on my arms. His eyes were red, but they were clear. The panic was gone. In its place was a quiet, fragile certainty. "I'm so sorry, Leo," he whispered, "for hurting you. I was so scared of what I was feeling that I didn't think about how it would make you feel. That was selfish and stupid." "We were both scared," I said. He took a deep breath. "I don't know what this is. I don't know what it means or where it's going. All I know is that my life makes a lot more sense when you're in it. And not just as my friend." He reached up and gently cupped my face, his thumb stroking my cheek, just as he had done that night in my bed. It was a conscious echo of the moment that had broken us, but now it was an act of mending. "Can I try that again?" he asked, his voice low. "The kiss. Can we do it again, without the panic? Without the mistake?" I leaned in and answered his question with my own lips. This kiss was different from the first. It wasn't hesitant. It was sure. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. It was a promise to stop running. It was the beginning of a new plan, one that we would have to draw up together, without a blueprint. It was a homecoming. We didn't stay at his apartment. It held no warmth, no history for us. We drove back to my place, back to our sanctuary. That night, when we got into bed, the tension was gone. There was no man's land between us. He pulled me close immediately, his arm a familiar, welcome weight. He kissed the top of my head. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered into my hair. "Good," I whispered back, my face pressed against his chest, the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heart a lullaby. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, we both fell asleep. The weeks that followed were a process of quiet discovery. We were learning a new language together, a vocabulary for this new shape our relationship had taken. There were no grand declarations, no labels. We didn't need them. Our commitment was written in the small, everyday acts of domesticity. It was in the way he started leaving more of his clothes in my drawers, not out of necessity, but out of a desire to populate the space. It was in the way I started buying the kind of coffee he liked without even thinking about it. It was in the easy way he'd kiss me goodbye in the morning before heading to work, a simple, grounding gesture that started both our days. The fear didn't vanish overnight, especially for Alex. There were moments of uncertainty, flickers of his old anxieties. He was navigating a new map of his own identity, and some days, the territory was unfamiliar and frightening. But he didn't run. He would get quiet, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow, and I would know he was wrestling with something. Instead of pushing him away, he would talk to me. He'd voice his fears, his confusion, his worries about what people would think, about what his family would say. And I would just listen and hold his hand and tell him that we would figure it out together. The honesty we had found in the wreckage of our confrontation became our new foundation. It was stronger than the old one had ever been. We began to heal, not just from our own recent hurt, but from the older, deeper wounds we had both been carrying. His heartbreak over Sarah slowly faded, replaced not by a new infatuation, but by a deeper, more stable connection. My years of quiet, lonely yearning were finally answered, the secret room in my heart thrown open, its contents brought out into the light. We found a profound peace in the simple act of being together. Lying in bed on a Sunday morning, the light filtering through the blinds, reading our own books, but with his leg thrown over mine, was a kind of quiet joy I had never known was possible. One afternoon, a few months later, I was developing photos in the small darkroom I had set up in my bathroom. Alex was sitting on the closed toilet seat, watching me in the dim red glow of the safe light. He was fascinated by the process, by the alchemy of it. I was pulling a new print from the developer bath, a picture I had taken of him the week before. He was asleep on the couch. We still spent lazy afternoons there, with a book open on his chest, the afternoon light falling across his face. As the image slowly emerged on the paper, resolving from a ghostly outline into a clear, detailed portrait, he leaned forward. "That's how you see me?" he asked, his voice soft with wonder. I looked at the photograph. It was a picture of a man at peace, a man who was unguarded, safe, and deeply loved. "Yeah," I said, my voice thick. "That's how I see you." He reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. He didn't say anything else. He just held my hand, and we watched the image of him, of us, of this new life we were building, fully emerge from the darkness. We learned that the most profound changes in our lives often don't happen in the grand, dramatic moments, but in the quiet, accumulated stillness that follows. They happen when you stop running, when you finally turn to face the person who has been waiting for you, and realize you were never really lost at all. You were just on your way home. And in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together, we had both finally arrived.